Who could resist?
So we're going to cover three things tonight. We're going to go back and revisit consciousness that we touched on last time and try and do a little different spin on it, different things. Then we're going to try and do our piece on meditation. We've been caught running out of time, so I just moved it up to number 2 on radically happy. And then Marjorie has some nice poetry that we'll go through at the end. So that's what we're going to do tonight.
That hopefully will dovetail with what we talked about last week and what we'll talk about this week.
Right. So let's see if I go here. What I'm going to do, just to set the stage here. Here we go. We're dealing with this notion of mind-body problem and consciousness and awareness. And so we have this basic issue, which is I have a body and I look at it and here's some fingers and everything else that goes with it. And then it seems that I've got these little 2 eyes, these portal that look out, and there's something back there apparently, and so that's there. That's the mind thing, and here's the body, and what in the world is going on between these 2 things. So that takes me back to something we did early on, which is our quantum double slit experiment, to just show you, instead of posing this as a philosophical problem, we'll talk about an actual experiment. The experiment's 100 years old, and we'll just run through this little video to remind everyone of it, and then we'll do some more stuff. So here we go.
And here we are, the granddaddy of all quantum weirdness, the infamous
Oops.
double-slit experiment. To understand this experiment, we first need to see how particles, or little balls of matter, act. If we randomly shoot a small object, say a marble, at the screen, we see a pattern on the back wall where they went through the slit and hit. Now, if we add a second slit, we would expect to see a second band duplicated to the right. Now, let's look at waves. The waves hit the slit and radiate out, striking the back wall with the most intensity directly in line with the slit. The line of brightness on the back screen shows that intensity. This is similar to the line the marbles make. But when we add the second slit, something different happens. If the top of one wave meets the bottom of another wave, they cancel each other out. So now there is an interference pattern on the back wall. Places where the 2 tops meet are the highest intensity, the bright lines, and where they cancel, there is nothing. So when we throw things, that is matter, through 2 slits, we get this, 2 bands of hits. And with waves, we get an interference pattern of many bands. Good so far. Now, let's go quantum. An electron is a tiny, tiny bit of matter, like a tiny marble. Let's fire a stream through one slit. It behaves just like the marble, a single band. So, if we shoot these tiny bits through 2 slits, we should get, like the marbles, 2 bands. What? An interference pattern. We fired electrons. bits of matter through. We get a pattern like waves, not like little marbles. How? How could pieces of matter create an interference pattern like a wave? It doesn't make sense. But physicists are clever. They thought maybe those little balls are bouncing off each other and creating that pattern. So they decide to shoot electrons through one at a time. There is no way they can interfere with each other. But after an hour of this, the same interference pattern is seen to emerge. The conclusion is inescapable. The single electron leaves as a particle, becomes a wave of potentials, goes through both slits, and interferes with itself to hit the wall like a particle. But mathematically, it's even stranger. It goes through both slits and it goes through neither. And it goes through just one and it goes through just the other. All of these possibilities are in superposition with each other. Physicists were completely baffled by this. So they decided to peek and see which slit actually goes through. They put a measuring device by one slit to see which one it went through and let it fly. But the quantum world is far more mysterious than they could have imagined. When they observed, the electron went back to behaving like a little marble. It produced a pattern of two bands, not an interference pattern of many. The very act of measuring or observing which slit it went through meant it only went through one, not both. The electron decided to act differently, as though it was aware it was being watched. It was here that physicists stepped forever into the strange, never world of quantum events. What is matter? Particles or waves? And waves of what? And what does an observer have to do with any of this? The observer collapsed the wave function simply by observing.
Okay. So this is just, oops, hold on, let me stop this. This is just to set the stage again. Here was an indication for Western science that somehow consciousness or the mind of the observer was somehow entering into the actual experiments that are going around, or that the most fundamental thing here is really going to be what people are calling consciousness here. And we'll see how this plays out. I wanted to do one thing here, which was, again, this is what Ron Cowen observed. And here we go. So Ron observed here, this is right off our website. So you see here, there's this is a drawing he made. He observed an electron. And an electron, according to his observations, is actually a donut. It's a torus. So there's a hole through the middle of it. And then it's kind of fat. And it's got 10 strings wrapped around it that are all closed, all wrapped around one another. And so this is looking down from the top. You can see here's the hole in the donut and so forth. But the key thing he noticed was that the electron is covered with what he called information. So there's little blocks here that are on some mind-boggling small scale that have information. They have bits, and they're constantly scanning the world around it. And bits that are there have both the algorithms and the actual data. And when they see there's one slit, it behaves like this particle you see here. And when there's two slits, the algorithm tells it to behave as a wave. And when he actually looked at not simply the electron, but all kinds of other particles, and in particular, he looked at the compartments that make up space itself, space being discrete, it's a foam around us, that the walls of the space compartments are covered with information. And it just covers everything. And so this would be what would make up the collective unconsciousness that Jung talked about, that is everywhere, that's all around us, that links to everything. And so this is intrinsic to the world that we have here and controlling everything. Remember that this information here can actually control the electric fields and the fields of gravity and all of the other forces that we have out here. It isn't simply monitoring these things. It has the wherewithal in these algorithms to actually control things. So if you wanted to levitate and you knew how to do that, you would be accessing these information blocks and you could levitate. And there's lots of examples of people that have done that. So now,
Is it fair to say that that's the way the inherent unity of the universe functions? It functions on that level through that mechanism.
yeah, it's what controls everything. So
And it's what unifies everything.
right. So this is not a minor thing. This is how the universe in fact behaves. And well, last time we looked at a video on this, and I've got a little different video this time to go look at. We just pull it up.
I thought that was one of our best ones ever.
And yeah, this is very deep stuff. So here we go. This is another one in the same series, and we'll see what you think of this. It's going to take a little bit, I think half an hour, 25 minutes. So here we go.
Have captivated the human imagination for thousands of years.
Yeah, hold on.
The first of these is why the universe exists at all. Why is there something rather than nothing? In many ways, this is a primordial question and has been raised by thinkers of every culture. And yet this ultimate mystery of existence is all but eclipsed by another mystery, that conscious minds exist to perceive it and bear conscious witness to the universe. While it is present to every waking moment of our lives, nothing is more mysterious than the fact that reality allows for conscious experience. Consciousness is the gateway of all value, meaning, and significance in the universe. And yet no scientific consensus has ever been reached about how and why we have it. An ancient idea is that the mystery of consciousness and the mystery of existence are intimately connected. And perhaps surprisingly, there are now growing numbers of philosophers and scientists who take this possibility very seriously. It is this possible connection between these two great mysteries that we will explore today. The mystery of existence. Over the last century, cosmologists have learned a great deal about the early universe. By analyzing cosmic background radiation, cosmologists peer deeply into the past, inferring the state of the universe in what is thought to be its first fractions of a second. But where did it all come from? What caused the universe? What happened before the Big Bang? The physicist Stephen Hawking cautions that this is the wrong question. The beginning of the universe was itself the beginning of time. To ask what came before time is meaningless, like asking what is north of the North Pole. And yet, for many, this answer fails to satisfy. Why did the universe burst forth into existence? And what shaped it to be the way that it is? Physicists have proposed that the spark of existence had its origin in a quantum fluctuation, triggering an explosive chain reaction, leading to the still evolving universe we inhabit today. This narrative of existence, however, presupposes the laws of quantum mechanics. It leaves entirely unexplained why the primordial situation should be constrained by quantum physics. It is here that we encounter the central problem which haunts the mystery of existence. Every time we propose the existence of a new initial state or cause, another one is required to explain that. Instead of explaining existence, we find ourselves simply adding more to that which needs to be explained. The same presumably goes for consciousness. To those who claim consciousness to be fundamental to reality, there is the challenge of explaining how consciousness might avoid the same problem of infinite regress. Why placing it at the foundations of nature doesn't simply add yet more to that which needs to be explained. In recent times, the possibility that consciousness is fundamental to reality has re-entered the academic conversation and gained new respect from philosophers and scientists alike. There are a number of reasons for this, which I've explored in other videos, but to summarize very briefly, in recent decades, it has grown ever more conspicuous that the materialist understanding of science seems entirely unequipped to explain how and why consciousness exists. That our consciousness, the most undeniable fact of reality, could so entirely evade our scientific paradigm has been taken by some as a conspicuous sign that materialism, while fantastically useful, is not an exhaustive account of nature, and that what we have called consciousness may in fact represent a deeper part of reality than previously imagined, at least by most modern scientists.
If you can't explain consciousness in terms of the existing fundamentals, space, time, mass, charge, then as a matter of logic, you need to expand the list. The natural thing to do is to postulate consciousness itself as something fundamental, a fundamental building block of nature.
Part of the motivation for this view comes from the fact that standard science provides only an external and behavioral account of reality. Its intrinsic nature, what reality is in itself, is unprovided by physics. Furthermore, the immanent reality of consciousness is the only intrinsic nature we know of, and in several respects, it seems to be an attractive candidate for also being the intrinsic interior nature of reality itself. But if consciousness is in some way fundamental to reality, how might this shed light on the mystery of existence? This question was explored by philosophers in the late 18th and early 19th century, when a movement known as German idealism rose to prominence in Europe. As the movement progressed, a core circle of thinkers argued for the absolute primacy of consciousness. Among other notable thinkers, philosophers Johann Fichte, Friedrich Schelling, and Georg Hegel urged that a deeper understanding of consciousness is necessary to understand why anything exists at all. It was Friedrich Schelling who first drew a direct parallel with the absolute ground of existence and the essential structure of consciousness. Existence, Schelling theorized, must be self-grounding. What this means, essentially, is that the primordial basis of reality must somehow be the cause of its own existence. To avoid the problem of infinite regress, an ultimate ground must be supposed, of which self-existence is part of its intrinsic nature. So what does this have to do with consciousness? The philosopher and mentor of Schelling, Johann Fichte, had previously argued that a unique feature of consciousness is that it does not appear grounded in anything beyond itself. The conscious self is self-producing, insofar that it exists only in and to itself. As the contemporary philosopher Douglas Hofstadter has put it, quote, "It is almost as if this slippery phenomenon called self-consciousness lifted itself up by its own bootstraps, almost as if it made itself out of nothing." End quote. In a similar way, the philosopher Peter Sass described self-consciousness as like a, quote, "magical matryoshka, a Russian nesting doll which also magically contains itself." It was precisely this quality that Schelling realized must be an attribute of the ultimate ground of existence. Furthermore, this was a quality that could be found nowhere else but in consciousness. Today, centuries later, the philosopher Freya Matthews defends a position very similar to Schelling. Matthews has pointed out that the self-causing principle behind existence must be reflexive, meaning that it directs back into itself. Any truly self-causing principle must be, in essence, about itself, and yet this property of aboutness, known to philosophers as intentionality, is another property found nowhere else but in consciousness. Something from nothing. Could anything ever really come from nothing? Perhaps the concept of a true nothing is simply an idea represented nowhere in reality. Perhaps instead of beginning with nothing, the challenge of explaining existence should instead focus on defining a self-existing ground, at which explanation can finally end. As we've already seen, physicists have proposed that the true ground floor of reality is the seething quantum realm of particles foaming in and out of existence. While this level of reality surely exists, there is no clear reason why the primordial situation should be constrained by quantum physics. A deeper level of explanation seems to be required. One possibility is that consciousness is the absolute ground of existence. And while this would add yet another level of existence, as we have seen, it offers the benefit of actually posing an explanation for its self-grounding, self-existence. How quantum physics came to be the ground of reality calls out for explanation, whereas consciousness, in theory, can explain itself. If this is the case, we might wonder how such a necessary self-grounding consciousness could give rise to quantum physics and everything else. How could something as intangible as consciousness ground and connect with the laws of physics? Respected physicists have long defended, albeit controversially, that a connection point does exist between consciousness and quantum physics, notably in relation to observation. It seems that in all quantum experiments, the state of a system is always defined by the information that could be made available to observers. In quantum experiments, the choice to observe has the effect of defining the state of the system, which would otherwise present itself in a superposition of all possible states, and in which producing very different experimental outcomes. While the interpretation of this very strange finding is hotly debated, leading physicists, both past and present, have pointed to consciousness as playing a central role in quantum measurement. Is it possible that the universe exists through self-observation? Is the universe, as the physicist John Wheeler once called it, a self-excited circuit in which consciousness gives meaning and thus reality to the world? In the past, arguments that consciousness is fundamental to reality have been dismissed because in the physical world, there is simply no room for consciousness to play a role. No consciousness forces or mental particles have ever been discovered. But as the philosopher David Chalmers has pointed out, in the quantum world, this is simply no longer the case. And while a taboo surely exists around the subject, in quantum physics, there nonetheless exists, quote, a giant causal opening that is perfectly suited for consciousness to fill, end quote. A role for consciousness in quantum measurement, Chalmers points out, finally provides this fundamental property of consciousness with a fundamental role to play. It is worth keeping in mind that it remains a complete mystery what physical laws are actually describing. The intrinsic nature of the world, what reality is in itself, is entirely unexplained by physics. It is therefore at least possible that physical laws, including quantum mechanics, are in fact rooted in consciousness. While the infamous claim that consciousness collapses the quantum wave function may be wrong, it is a possibility we cannot yet rule out. And as we shall now explore, it is one which offers a unique account of existence, as arriving in a mysterious way from its future. Future origins. Another baffling discovery of quantum physics is that in the quantum world, future events can affect earlier events. Time can effectively double back on itself. More broadly, this opens the striking possibility that the birth of the universe could have been caused by its future. This was an idea proposed by the physicist John Wheeler and later developed by the physicist Paul Davies. Wheeler pointed out that observation of a quantum system not only defines the state of the system in that moment, but also defines its entire history. It is as though the act of measurement produces histories which are consistent with the present choice to observe. As Wheeler once famously remarked, quote, we decide what the photon shall have done after it has already done it, end quote. In recent decades, this surprising fact of quantum physics has been demonstrated many times in laboratories, and as Wheeler argued, there is no reason to doubt that this principle is true of the entire universe. That observations made now, or perhaps even in the distant future, stretch all the way back to the beginning of the universe, and thereby establish the necessary conditions in which observers can exist. If so, we as observers are in a mysterious way participators in the existence of the universe. Along these lines, Davies has also argued that it is at least plausible that the long-term evolution of consciousness will one day pervade the entire universe. That through the spreading and development of conscious minds, perhaps over billions of years, the universe is destined to eventually realize its total mental potential. In a resulting cosmic omega point, the entire universe finally becomes fully self-observed, thereby satisfying the conditions of its own existence and retroactively creating itself.
Part of this, the weirdness of this quantum physics is that observations which are made now can affect the nature of reality as it was in the past. And In the same way, observations made in the very far future, maybe a trillion years hence, can affect the nature of reality today and back in the Big Bang. So if you buy this whole quantum physics package and you have this universe saturated by mind or saturated by observers, then indeed the whole character of the universe, including the emergence of its laws and the nature of its states, become inextricably intertwined with its mentality, with its mindfulness.
Davies admits that this is a highly speculative idea, but it is nonetheless consistent with what we know about quantum mechanics and not an idea we can yet rule out. Existence from value. Another possible connection between consciousness and the mystery of existence lies in the relationship of consciousness with value. Philip Goff is among the recent wave of philosophers defending the fundamentality of consciousness. Goff has also suggested that the animating force of reality may be mysteriously connected to its value. Goff reminds us of an insight first made by the philosopher David Hume in the 19th century. Hume observed that we simply do not perceive causes in nature. While we perceive a flow of events, our apparent perception of causes is an illusion. Similarly, science does not actually reveal causes in the world. Goff points out that once we truly recognize this, we are free to consider an alternative possibility, that natural necessity, the animating force of existence, is not material or mechanical, but in fact follows from its value. Goff considers that such a view might also help to explain why, against all of the odds, the universe seems finely tuned to allow for what he calls, quote, a universe of great value, in which conscious, value-sensitive beings can evolve. In the last century, cosmologists have learned that slightly changing any number of precise values in the laws of physics has the immediate effect of obliterating all possibility of life. Among all of the intelligible arrangements of nature's laws, the probability of a life-friendly universe is, in fact, trillions to one. This provocative discovery has led to the proposal by some of a multiverse, trillions of other universes, the existence of which can nullify the apparent specialness of the universe. But as Goff and others have argued, fine-tuning may actually be an indicator of the deeper significance and necessity of consciousness on the metaphysical landscape. The philosopher John Leslie explored this possibility in his 1979 book, Value and Existence, where he argued that because of the problem of infinite regress, no physical mechanism will ever be adequate to explain the universe's existence. To solve this mystery, we must go beyond materialism and consider that something very different, more akin to value, is the animating force of reality. If so, a universe capable of supporting value-sensitive, conscious minds might have been a metaphysical necessity. Is it possible, as the 20th century philosopher Alfred North Whitehead believed, that, quote, existence itself is the upholding of value intensity, end quote. The view that value is the animating force of existence is a perspective with deep philosophical roots both in Western and Eastern systems of thought. Plato, in particular, believed that the animating first cause of existence was its goodness. For Plato, existence itself held intrinsic value over non-existence, and that this latent value was the generative force of reality. While the human understanding of the universe has progressed a long way since the time of Plato, there are nonetheless philosophers today who argue that Plato was essentially correct, that the underlying nature of the universe is more mind-like than classically physical, and the true creative force of this reality is its value. Consciousness is the vehicle of all value, meaning, and significance in the universe. To put it bluntly, without consciousness, nothing matters. But is it also possible, as we have explored today, that without consciousness, nothing would exist? Hi everyone, I hope you found this interesting. Another highly speculative episode. Of course, it is impossible to completely explore an area like this in a relatively short video, but I am very curious to know what you think about this deep question of existence and the possible connection to consciousness. So let's talk about it in the comments.
Okay. So there we have, we got two Stevens. Okay.
Stephen in stereo.
Yeah. So here we have, no, again, it's a different video. It's different than the one we saw before. All of these are on the website. And
Some of the images were the same, though.
yeah. Let me see if there's anything else. Yeah, there's one more here. Is the universe alive? I think this one, let's see how long it is. Yeah, it's an hour. So that's why we're not going to do it tonight. So there we have this evidence that's pointing to this stuff. I'm going to get out of this now and just go back over to what Ron had observed. Let me just go there. And let's see. So we started with this information that's everywhere, that is controlling the algorithms, and it leads to it leads to evolving patterns of behavior. So, for example, it's more than likely that this governs the compartments of space, what sort of actual structure those compartments have. And it's hard to imagine anything being more fundamental than that. What is space like? The only other stuff that we have here, Ron made a number of observations, but they all take us back to this one picture that we continue to harp on, which is we have this 26-dimensional space. We have 2 dimensions of time, one for matter and one for dark matter, which leaves us with 24 spatial dimensions, and they appear to be paired up. So our dimensions for space, the 3 space dimensions, are paired up with the 3 dark matter dimensions by the square root of -1. And I have no idea why that is. And similarly, these other 6-dimensional spaces for matter, dark matter, and synchronizing between the 2, and these are all paired up by the square root of -1. So you could say, instead of 6 dimensions that are real, we have 3 complex dimensions here for the matter, 3 for the dark matter, 3 that synchronize things, and then we actually have matter and dark matter linked up together. So there's 4 3-dimensional complex spaces that are doing all this, and it's all coded, it's all governed by information, by the information that's there. And this is what is really fundamental to everything that's going on here. So we start off with a rock that we have. The rock has some of this information in it, so there's some notion of awareness. We move our way up into more complicated sorts of chemistries, where here we have physics at the bottom, chemistry and biology. And so the chemistry side of things, again, there's information scattered all through the different particles that are there, the compartments in space that hold these particles. And finally, we get up to biology, which again is interacting, is using this information to do the things that we see around us. I'm going to stop here. Pretty sure that's all I wanted to cover. Let me just take one quick look. Hold on one sec. No, okay. Okay, so that's I'm going to stop there. Are there, obviously there's questions. People have been talking about this, since, effectively you have someone like Plato who looked at the shadows in the cave, and then it was really that was what was making things real. That was how Plato described this. And it goes on and on. So for thousands and thousands of years, people have been trying to capture this concept. Ron came up with I think a different view, viewing it as information. And we'll have to see where this goes. What it gives us a different way of looking at the world. So I'm now going to go off and I've picked up our.
I'd like to say
Go
something.
ahead.
Something I really appreciate about it is how consistent it is with the Kabbalistic view that the purpose of existence is in order for the divine to know itself. And that's an evolutionary process. And it's through the existence of the universe that the divine is what? It's in a state of emanation. That's the word they use. It's emanating from itself, from its mind, from nothingness into somethingness in order that it can know itself. Because if not for that, it's in this hellish state of non-existence. So it is a question of consciousness being the most fundamental operating principle that is allowing everything to exist and necessitating everything to exist. And that drive for it to realize itself. And that this is an ever expanding evolution. And that's exactly the I think really deep concepts of Kabbalah that I was really in love with. And I used to say, it's like spiritual physics. And my teacher would say, it's not like that. That's what it is, But it's so affirming for me to see that the physicists are kind of closing that gap. And they sound more and more mystical all the time, which I just love. And I love that they're coming up with more ways to measure this and look at it and experience it and describe it. Because I think that expands our consciousness of reality and the whole question of consciousness. It's kind of, as he said, it's a reflexive thing. It's going back on itself. But on a certain level, there are those who believe that that is what it's all about. And that's the underlying unity of the so-called universe.
Yeah, I keep calling it information because in the last since the 1940s onward, we've had this notion of computing get formalized, and we have information sciences now. And so by framing it this way, I feel more comfortable, especially with what Ron observed, that he saw little blocks of information that are just everywhere. The density of this stuff is inconceivable. Makes your little phone or PC processor look like a dinosaur, to put it mildly. And yet, it's a useful framework to talk about these. But consciousness or awareness is it's becoming clear that what got missed was it's the arena that is where all these things are taking place around us. That is really where the action is. It's the arena itself, and we get hung up on talking about material things like particles and waves and so forth, and that misses the point. The more fundamental thing is the information and what goes with that, the evolution of that information over trillions of years into these incredible mind forms that are out there, that are all around us. So,
and just the fact that we have anything at all, rather than just nothingness.
yeah.
There's
So
also,
go ahead.
there's also the philosophy of solipsism, which is about a construct that everything that we experience, every aspect of the universe, is actually a construct of our own minds, and that it doesn't really exist other than as a construct of our consciousness. I think that's the extreme view of this type of thought.
Well, on the one hand, each of us is going to view these things differently, and our views will evolve differently over time. On the other hand, you see the linkages through that picture of all the different subspaces linking the information flows everywhere. So it's what you see and what I see might be in some sense different, but in fact, there really is one underlying set of information that's governing everything.
Well, and if it is all a projection of some kind, then, so be it. That's what it is. Then, why not? And does that really change anything? Then that's a miracle.
Yeah.
Well, it changes things in the sense that I'm not sure where you take this to the extreme. I can't think of it being other than that we've got to be in some way, shape, or form God, in the sense that nothing exists, really exists outside of our own consciousness. If we visit the fact that others, in fact, really do exist, based on this philosophy, that there would sort of be a kind of a counter-transference. I don't know how to describe it. Of that, I exist because you believe that I exist, and vice versa. That we don't exist in our own rights because everything that we experience as the quote real world is actually a construct of our own consciousness. So I don't know what the logical sense of all of that is.
Ozzy Osbourne said, I forget exactly how it went. Are you a figment of my imagination, or am I one of yours?
I think that's exactly what this is all about.
Yeah.
So I'm struck by the concept of coterminality between divisibility and indivisibility. So if they are inseparable, then all of the information that you could access in one unbelievably small area is just a gateway to everything else that you have access to. And so one would potentially see every minute thing as a construct, but it's just a piece of something grand.
Well, and it could be like a fractal, that, or a hologram, that each minute part contains the whole.
Yeah, the polarity being combined is just what I kind of eventually get to through listening to all of the stuff that we're talking about. That it's inseparable, that although we might divide or attempt to divide, that it's all one.
Right.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
And the unity is more complex than we can ever fathom.
Bruce, did you want to say something? You're muted.
Yeah, like in terms of the understanding from a non-duality perspective, which is I'm lucky to have, is that everything is already in union. There's no separation anywhere. The thing is, I know this is kind of unusual and all that, but my primary experience is this incredibly vast understanding of love and compassion that's just is part of everything. It's not separate from anything. It's kind of hard to comprehend because it's totally nonverbal and is way beyond any kind of normal understanding whatsoever. But that's kind of how what's actually happening, and it's evolving all the time. It's a movement of reality. So it's a whole different understanding from a nonverbal point of view. The biggest component is the love compassion component. It's just beyond any kind of verbalization or explanation at all. But it's extremely vivid.
In Kabbalah, that is considered to be the reason for existence, is the love. It's just,
Yeah, that makes sense, except that it's extraordinarily complex.
right.
It's so beyond any kind of understanding at all because it keeps growing forever. It's so vast. And it's like the whole movement of expansion and understanding is part of all that.
Sure.
Anyway, yeah.
We're gonna come back to this in some more classes because I think we're just scratching the surface. So I'm gonna go back now to our book, Radically Happy, and I'm gonna do part 3 of it, just touching on this now. And remember, this is what Ron worked on, was through significant meditation, he was able to do the observations that he's been sharing with us. And so let's just run through. I'm on part 3 of the book, which is called Mastering Dignity. And what we see here is there are 3 keys to radical happiness. 3 keys to radical happiness. There's cultivating dignity, there's relax the clinging, and there's be aware. Cultivating dignity, relax the clinging, and be aware. So let me just run through each of these 3 so we have a base. So cultivating dignity, by bringing basic and interconnected happiness into a unified whole, we deepen our confidence in these practices. In order to develop a firm foundation for experiencing radical happiness, we need a quiet confidence in basic and interconnected happiness. That confidence comes from understanding the reasoning behind how the practices function and experiencing the results of the exercises, just like when you practice a musical instrument and your playing improves, you gain confidence in your ability to play. So cultivating dignity is one piece of it. Number two is relax the clinging. We use thoughts and emotions to relax and to release our subtle habitual tendencies. By looking directly at them, these tendencies dissolve and we rest in objectless meditation. Objectless meditation. So that's relaxing the clinging, letting go. And then finally, being aware. We turn our meditation directly toward the stone thrower, the knowing quantity of mind, the final key to being radically happy. At the moment of looking into the knowing quality of mind, we are free of the stones of habitual thinking and can rest our attention in pure awareness. Okay, this is to be aware. And so now they go through each of these three in more detail. So there's a chapter on each of these. Cultivating dignity. I'm just looking at it to see if there's any interesting quotes. So here we have the following. Present moment awareness was always available. Warm-heartedness is your natural condition when all the neurotic habits are dissolved. You already possess within your mind all the ingredients for happiness and well-being. It's as though understanding and exercise, it's through understanding and exercise that you gain this experience. And it's through this experience that you gain an unshakable, self-assured dignity. So there's that. And the section on relax the clinging. I'm just looking to see if there's any quotes on that. No, there's just some exercises here. Here's a quote. If you have 100 thoughts pass through your mind in the space of a minute, it means you have 100 supports for meditation. And finally, that we have the be aware. This is the third piece. Let go and rest. Let go of being present. Let go of knowing. Don't look at the thoughts. Look toward what thinks.
I think of Emerson's, and he got that from Coleridge, right? About
Right.
the invisible eyeball.
Right. And so there's a plan, a daily plan for radical happiness. There's a morning, an afternoon, and an evening set of activities or exercises to work out. And that is it. That concludes the book. So I think, recommend everyone getting it. Bruce did, well, I'm going to just put this up here. Here it is here. Wait, it's down here. Oops, where did it go? We close it?
No, it's in
It's
Acrobat.
yeah, but what is it here? Hold on, I'm gonna have to go dig it out a second. Let me just see.
Is it Acrobat open someplace? Is that it? Oh, no.
It looks like we closed it. Yeah. Sorry about that. Hold on. Let me just pull up what Bruce had a good catch here. Give me a second.
Would anybody like to say anything while we're queuing up?
Okay, here we go. We'll send this out. So this is the teaching on Miller-Rep's Three Nails by Garshan Rinpoche. The book that we went through, Radical Happiness, one of the authors was Chok Rinpoche. So, and there is a YouTube video here that you can look at on this. So I'm just going to, this is relatively short, so I'm just going to go read it, and then we'll have discussion. So, realization of non-duality begins with seeing space between thoughts. Your mind is just like an ocean, and thoughts are just like waves. You soon recognize that your mind is completely empty and pristinely clear. Your mind develops insight and clarity. You gain a certainty that is free of any doubt. Clear knowing arises. It is inexpressible and beyond words. This mind is called the perfection of wisdom or transcendent awareness. This is the mind that creates everything. The view is like hot water. When you put ice blocks into hot water, they'll instantly melt. All thoughts of hope and fear and doubts in the mind will melt. You see within the mind self
And other.
self and others do not exist. You've realized non-duality. All appearance and existence arise from the mind. When you gain certainty in this view, it is called the nail of the view. When you continue to abide within this view and sustain clarity on an ongoing basis, continuously, day and night, this is called the nail of meditation. Negative emotions leave no trace in your mind. When they arise, they leave no feeling in your mind at all. There's full awareness that is really a self-knowing awareness. No feeling or kind of experience of happiness or suffering can change its color in any way. It just stays as it is. So the result of sustaining such a continuous state of awareness, one has realized emptiness. The quality of this realization is that immeasurable compassion for others naturally arises, and naturally one will not engage in non-virtuous activities. This is the nail of conduct. So these are the three nails of Miller-Rep. Okay, so let me get out of this. Bruce, any comments you want to make?
Well, that's kind of the official way of describing non-duality. They talk a lot about, well, how to get there. And they also, in this little short thing, is a verification that you have found it. It's very accurate. That's basically my experience. It's very unusual to, not that many people find that level of reality, but it is there for everyone to find or have. My main experience is the love compassion part, which is mentioned at the end. But the incredible clarity is really, took me a long time to figure out what happened. What happened is the self that I had just simply vanished. I woke up one day and it was vanished. That was it. And so then it unfolded, and in the beginning there, like the first thing that was very noticeable was an incredible clarity. The clarity had a quality about it that was very vivid and recognizable. And then from there, I noticed that certainty was present. Like that, there was no doubt anywhere. The mind understood reality as it was in the moment. And then it unfolded further, and I started to find this huge
Sort of recent.
love mind. And then that unfolded. And so it's a very fine place to be, that's for sure.
Yeah, I just want to point out, it isn't simply the Buddhist tradition that does this. You have, for example, shaman or medicine men in Native American tribes, or mystics, Christian mystics of different sorts all through the ages, and it goes on and on. It's not simply, this is a way, but there's no right way. You'll end up.
Well, my experience also is like, I walk every day, and usually I walk in a mall. And every so often, when you're telepathic, you can recognize this higher state instantly. The mind knows instantly when somebody else has it. And there's a lot of people who actually have that reality and are simply born with it. And,
when you're walking in the mall, you come across them just walking around.
Yeah. So it's a nature, it's a reality of consciousness that is universal. You don't have to be Buddhist to have it.
Right. No. So with that, any more comments? We finished our sessions on meditation now, but I'm going to send out the nails of Milarep, so you have those as part of the recording. And it's now Marjorie's turn to give us some poetry. Where do you want to start?
That one.
This one?
I wanted to pick up with, we kind of recircled a lot of thoughts from last week, this week, and last week I shared some poetry by Denise Levertov, which I felt was following on the poetry of Jory Graham. And I was saying last week that for some people, this isn't a question of studying. As Bruce just said, it's a question of knowing. But some people do choose to kind of ground it with years and years of study and practice, as Bruce has done in studying Buddhism for many, many years. I started with Buddhism when I was 14. I had an English teacher who was deeply immersed in it and offered to introduce me to it in independent study. And our main text initially was Ram Dass's book, and then he added Alan Watts and other readers. And I was back and forth for a long time. That's when I first started to be introduced to meditation. I'm not saying I've perfected it yet, but it did completely change my worldview. But I ended up going more on a Western path into, in the West, I feel our true spirituality is esoteric and split off from our exoteric religious teachings. In the East, I think they're more unified, and there's a sort of a stronger cultural tradition that contains it. For me, the most familiar feeling spirituality in my life has been Kabbalah. And I have my reservations with the cultural container for that. and I'm not really on that path anymore. But I went into the Western esoteric traditions and Jung really for a way to ground my consciousness, which was kind of growing on its own. And at times it felt unnerving and it was going too far. And I needed to do something more organized and codified. But it was a natural impulse, I would say, from nursery school. You know, I had questions like, what if everything we know is somebody's dream? And I would hound my mother with these questions. And she would say, my God, she's making abstractions. You know, she's 2 years old. She's asking these things. And she would just sort of say, well, I don't know. What if we do? And I said, well, what if they wake up? You know, and it's always been there. And so in that way, I think it's universal. So this is a poem that I wrote thinking about these things when I was 22. I had just come back from a trip to Utah with my mother and my sister, which was just mind-blowing. And I think it was either right before or right after I saw the movie Walkabout, which is kind of well, it's set in Australia, and it's kind of like a lizard-eyed view or a scorpion's eye view of the desert, and this incredible view of reality that is an attempt to embrace the Aboriginal metaphysics, really. That it's just a beautiful film, Nicholas Rowe. It doesn't translate to a small screen at all, though. When you see it on a large screen and you're just immersed down there with the scorpion, it's just mind-blowing. So that was all kind of informing this when I was 22, and this was before I had studied anything esoteric. I had studied some Buddhism and kind of drifted away from that. So this is just an example of a kind of an untutored mystic, let's say. So, and with no religion, my parents were atheists, and they had science backgrounds. So here I am at 22, just back from Utah, in kind of a weird depression and kind of alienated state, and kind of ripe for something new. And this is just what happened one night. A string of miracles lay smug on a table of brass and wood. It was right here in this room. Claiming credit, declaring inevitability, having no humility, showing no dismay, so brazenly blasé in the face of such overwhelming unlikelihood. An envelope which transported a letter of love, a cup of lukewarm coffee, a crumpled pack of cigarettes under a pack of matches. We met in Utah, I from New York, he from Philadelphia, and climbed into canyons, layers of change frozen in rock, and lay prostrate at night in the mountains, oh so wonderfully not, counting the stars and silently sharing the comments, unspeaking all our comments, discussing not our easy communion of such simple grace. We separated again as what is curiously termed the age of space. Once on the plain, I felt I could melt in and join him in our welcome. But finally I landed. To my home I am stupidly branded, and we are left with the words we hadn't spoken, realizing our love hadn't fully awoken. With verbal reverence, we long for one another's presence. Beans from Brazil to grind and boil through a filter, combining with rain and speed for nights of caffeine, schizophrenia, self-induced insomnia. This is the inventory of the items on the table. Tobacco flowing from the south to mark the passing minutes at the mouth, to draw sensations in nicotine and tar, to evidence that we are. And the matches, sulfur and friction, chemical and principle, so casually wedged in between cardboard swatches. Machines dispense them for not even a nickel. All cluttered in a careless array on a table of brass and wood, so brazenly blasé in the face of such overwhelming unlikelihood. Oh, and music, music floating everywhere, round and round, filling the room from a box of wire and tubes. It translates signals and waves of sound, regulating pulsations of fire, representing tiny thoughts of notes, suggesting a holiday of doom, with no existence alone, not even remote, alive only in the ear and mind, which they help us to spin and then unwind. The eons of perfect random coincidence, the parts that flew together due to circumstance, and compounded, coalesced, configured, culminated, to rise to this entire solitary moment. Despite what we've promulgated, in an endless whirl of time and space and matter, the molecules danced and rearranged to humanity's witness, ignoring all our wishes, how we harangue as mad as the Hatter, for order and improvement. What we ignore, of course, is that we are just another universal force. They say there was a bang when nothing ceased to be, and that civilization crawled out of the sea. For convenience's sake, to placate the ego, we've decided to have desired it so. When we get something we've wanted, we like to pretend our will went out and got it, or even more. But fate is impartial and it doesn't keep score. It just happened to happen, this collection of objects from everywhere, in a room filled with vibrating, resounding air, and I just happened to be there. No, it never happened at all. Yes, because it always was. I can see it in the trail of the silent flash of a single instant. A pearl on the string of eternity, on the speck of infinity. The mind is a miracle as petty and as grand as the very universe that bore it. And I wrote this poem about this magic moment, an attempt to store it in the hopes that another would understand. I almost neglected to mention that it's about the fourth dimension. So that was kind of the raw Marjorie.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Thank you. And that was really probably the first poem that I ever wrote. And then this was really in 2001, shortly after September 11th. I recycled some of the ideas and words from that 1979 poem. And then I polished it up a little in 2008. So this is, I think I might have shared this with this group, so forgive me if it's a repeat, but I want to do it in the context of what we've been talking about for the last 2 weeks and the film tonight. So, they talk about the universe doesn't end with a bang, but with a whimper. So that's where I'm picking up in this kind of bleak state of mind that I was in 2001. So with a whimper, and the subheading is Epidemic Cancer is the Earth's final line of self-defense. They say there was a bang when nothing ceased to be, and that civilization crawled out of the sea. That eons of perfect random coincidence conspired that chaos meet order exactly as planned. And all was supremely guided by an unseen hand, even as atoms flew together due to circumstance. Tiny molecules, blithely they danced, coalesced, configured, and culminated, until tiny bits of dust at last coagulated, into which the breath of life was exhaled, and thus unto matter was Holy Spirit lovingly impaled. They say the balance of the seasons, all the earth systems, interlocking reasons. All this by way of ascending clinical trials toward the pinnacle magnum opus, the simian universal apex, the intended spiritual focus, voila, the frontally lobed, opposably found bipedally superior Homo sapiens. Behind Darwin and his doctrine, science, the new church, a dangerous teleology lurks. The namer of beasts has become destroyer so savage, a benevolent creator's mocking shadow hunches in the meadow, and the implicate order's Dorian mirror image. They stabbed her with fences in the sight of the dawn. We march over her with our boots on. That's a quote of Jim Morrison. On the subject of hoisting your petard right into your own backyard, pouring poisons in the wellspring is not a prudent offering. We take our pending Pyrrhic victory over nature as manifest destiny, but I'm not so sure it's wise when our so-called sapiens may just be evolution's booby prize. When after all we are fleas on Gaia's back and hosts ourselves to mutant viral DNA. When at her utter whim on any given day, she can subtly stealth attack and working ever so insidiously from deepest down within, shrug us off and simply take her ball away. So I would say now that was a kind of prescience, we could say about, it's kind of like the second wave of September 11th has been the pandemic.
Very nice.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. You started that at 22 and then you've continued, through the decades. It's really quite something.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that. That was wonderful.
Thank you for listening. I don't share that part of myself much at all.
Well, I feel lucky.
And I hope I'm showing what we have in common.
It's certainly blended in with the subject of the evening.
Well, I'm glad that shows.
Totally.
And it's so gratifying for me to see these ideas come at from another direction that's equally valid. And
there'll be more.
yeah, and more to come. Yeah.
Will you or have you circulated those poems to the group?
Not really to any extent, no. I didn't really know where to begin. I didn't think.
Would you send them to us?
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
yeah, we'll
it'll
send
go
them
out
out.
tonight with the recording.
Of course, yeah. Okay, good.
Yes, thank
It's,
you.
sometimes it's good to read
Yes. I'm like that. I have to read and reread, and especially if I just hear it, I can't absorb it.
Remember, it's not what the poem means, it's how the poem means. Now, Judith, you're muted. You're muted. You're muted. There we go.
Compile them in a booklet.
Thank you. I have kind of a chapbook going. Thank you. And some of them are paired with collages that I started doing, I guess about 20, no, more like 30 years ago. And then I started doing them by hand, and then I started doing them in Photoshop. And so that's kind of a back burner project to put them together. They don't all have a counterpart. There's some collages that don't have a poem, and there's poems that don't have, but a lot of them have come together. I've had a couple of shows where I've framed them, and I usually print out the poem and make it look like a page of a book with a bookmark. So the poem is on one side and the collage is on the other. And I'd love to get those out there. And a lot of them can be paired up, you could say, with tarot. I don't know if I want to do 78 of them, you know, that's a big commitment, but a lot of them do align with tarot symbolism. And that's one of my main interests is symbolism. So I've had a show that I've done in New York and Vermont, and I did it here in Norwalk at one point, about a dozen of those. And so that's fun. I'd like to dust. I had them framed, and that was all lost in the tsunami that entered my life. But I saved the old computer that I had them in, and so that's part of my healing process now. Is part of my resurrection is resurrecting that hard drive, which Bart was kind enough to send out to a very expensive process. And when we have the wherewithal, we'll get a new computer with new software, and I can convert it all over. So I'm just doing it a little bit piecemeal now. That's part of my process. So sometimes it's painful.
Sure.
But I just love that I can talk about the ideas openly. It's really nice because I've been kind of a hermit with these thoughts for so long.
So that's all we wanted to cover tonight. We're going to spend some more time on consciousness, you know, going forward, trying to, there's a lot more there, awareness and so forth. So we'll see where we come out. Whether there anything that people want to cover in particular, we're going into the dog days of August. It's the end of August. By the way,
Bart asked if I had any idea where that comes from. It's from a constellation called Canis Major. Okay.
So anyway,
Very interesting.
if you've got anything
That's
you
visible,
want
that's
us to
just-
dig into, we will. I mean, for example, Nancy, you know, had raised this thing about the hierarchy of angels, and I went off into Wikipedia and looked, and some Catholic theologian in the 6th century came up with 9 hierarchies of angels. It's called angelology, okay? And at the bottom are angels. The bottom is angels. And one above the angels are the archangels. So the archangels really don't rate. And it goes on up from there into these other higher levels. And
Seraphim. And
yeah. So anyway, but I don't think we're going to cover that.
she was talking about Steiner, right?
Yeah, that was all from that was from Rudolf Steiner, who did the Waldorf schools, and he's an amazing individual. But
The angels were from Steiner?
the what?
The angels was related to Steiner?
Well, this was his view of it.
Yeah, yeah. It was. I'm giving you what's in Wikipedia, and Steiner had his own. I think they actually taught this in the Waldorf schools, that what this 6th century Catholic theologian did. And I have no idea why this guy thought he was correct.
Well, he was just doing his own sort of codification
Are angels
other ideas.
specifically Catholic, of Catholic origin?
No. It was just, he was just trying to describe the higher realms and what these mental entities might be that would be running around there in these higher spaces. And so, the takeaway would be that Jesus of Nazareth really was, not particularly special. He might be above an archangel, but that's not much.
Well, in Buddhism, they have lots of deities. You meditate on them.
Yeah, the Buddhists have them, the Hindus have them out the wazoo. There's no shortage of gods and goddesses and, hierarchies of these things. But they're
Well, in the Jewish tradition,
yeah,
a lot of angels. To me, they represent vibrations, and principles. They're like personifications of principles that are too abstract to really relate to otherwise.
and they evolve over time, and they've had literally trillions of years to evolve. So, it's inconceivable what they know about this thing or that thing or the other thing. So
Jung would say they're archetypes,
Is there,
Well,
is
and
there
that they pre-exist us. They seem like a human invention, but it's more like the other way around.
Bruce, when you would talk about deities in Buddhism, is there a kind of equivalence with that level of deity to angels? Because angels and deities, I don't really think of as there being an equivalence.
No, deities are usually gods. Like, for example, there's one of my favorite meditations is you visualize yourself as white with 4 arms and various things in the hands of, and you're radiating compassion to all sentient beings on Earth. I mean, it really affects your mind when you do that sort of thing. It's really they're very well crafted meditations.
Bruce, why do you need 4 arms?
What?
Why do you need 4 arms?
Better to feed
Oh,
yourself.
4 arms. Well, basically each deity, I mean, some of them have a lot more arms, and they all represent a particular quality of that particular deity. Like each, like a flower represents a certain kind of wisdom, or a rosary represents another component, and so on. And so you visualize these deities, and there's quite a few different kinds. There's peaceful, wrathful, male and female, and yab yum, where they are in union. And when you meditate on them, they're incredibly different experiences.
Mhm.
It's one of some of the main practices in Buddhism. I've done a lot of them, so it's really awesome stuff.
So there's a subject to the meditation?
Well, basically, you're imagining yourself being that deity. So it's like you're learning another aspect of consciousness or reality, especially when it comes to the wrathful deities. And the Yab Yum, the male-female union, is a whole other dimension of experience. So you're finding out a lot of aspects of consciousness that you normally wouldn't even dream about.
Is the idea that you're kind of like trying on embodying these qualities.
Yeah, well, you actually find out about things that are in your own reality. I mean, that's basically the main idea. Like meditating on Shenrizi is considered the Buddha of compassion. Like, it's a real wonderful meditation to do. Puts you in a whole different space and place altogether. It's awesome. You know, our Vajrasattva, he's a deity that's clear. And so you're imagining this incredible clarity of purity that is available to understand. They're wonderful meditations.
Would you like to introduce us to one? I'm assuming that there are classic
Oh,
examples.
there's hundreds of them, yeah. Well, my favorite, well, the two that I've done a lot of, one is the Shenrizi. So just trying to remember what's in the forearms. Okay, and there's a rosary in the right hand and a flower in the left hand. And the other twos are kind of here, and they're holding a jewel, which is called a wish-fulfilling gem. And you're sitting in a lotus and you're imagining that you're radiating compassion to all living beings. You know, it's a very uplifting meditation to do. The Vajrasattva, which is clarity, which is where you transcend all the difficulties that have ever existed in your own mind. In other words, it's kind of like a meditation on purification, and it's a very powerful meditation, and you can sense the clearing of the formations of the mind. It's really awesome stuff. One of my other favorite deities is a female deity, semi-wrathful. She's dancing and she holds a knife in one hand and a skull cup in another. And you know, there's meditations in the various chakras, and especially when you're meditating on a chakra, it really transforms the mind when you experience that directly. So it's yeah.
Great. Okay, let's try and wrap it up. Everybody have a great weekend, and hopefully this heat will break at some point. So today was only 83, thank God. And we will reconvene next week and enjoy. Have a good.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Being with us.
All right.
Bye-bye.